Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Straightforward topic today. Let's do it. Serious. What's the most disturbing thing you have ever seen? Please remember to like, share, say hello, and subscribe. This happened about 2 years ago. I was at my dad's car. He was driving, and we were going to the supermarket to get some snacks and drinks. While we were at the supermarket, we heard a big crash outside, but it didn't bother us enough to check out. We were in a hurry because we were expecting guests. When we went back to our car, we saw it. Two cars collided at such speed that one of them was literally almost totally destroyed. But the most disturbing part was the driver of the car. His head was literally gone, from the bottom jaw up. Nothing but blood spraying everywhere. I still sometimes see that scene in my dreams, because it traumatized me so much when I saw it. Edit. I heard the other driver didn't get a serious injury, but he was found guilty in court. 3 days before my 16th birthday, I watched my stepdad, who I considered my dad, kill himself with a shotgun shell to the head. I watched his head blow apart and one of his eyeballs land somehow intact on the table outside. I've hated the sight of snow since then. A week later, after the funeral, the snow had melted and we had to clean up the skull matter from our yard. My dad was working a saw, one of those big circular ones. Somehow he lost control of it and it cut his leg down to the bone. Thankfully he was working right next door to a hospital, so he didn't bleed out and was able to get it fixed. He's still alive today and the pain is basically gone. You can still see where it cut him on his leg though. I was 12 when this happened. I once had a suicidal friend at the time. We were 16, well, she was 17, and she had eaten rat poison in the morning before coming to school and only told me around lunchtime. So I went to tell our counselor and she called us both into her office, and my friend had confessed what she did, and when my counselor went out to go find a way to help her, the poison started its effects on her body, and I was the only one there, with her not knowing what to do. Still traumatized till today. I don't even speak to her anymore because it's that painful of an experience. When I was in high school, right after marching band practice, we heard a large crash and then started to see smoke rising in a nearby park where I used to park my car. We went over to investigate and saw the wreckage of a mid-air plane crash. Debris and body parts were scattered around the park, and a man was going around covering up bits and pieces with towels. Being a witness to the immediate after effects of a mid-air collision are super rare. Has anyone ever seen that in person? I went to go tubing with my family 12 years ago when I was 10, and we saw a huge crowd and went to check it out. This woman had a heart attack while tubing and was getting CPR while somebody had a camera in the woman's face. She died, and my family and I saw the woman even put into a bag and taken off to the coroner. I've never been to that city since then, as it terrified my family and I. When my husband overdosed on my Wellbutrin, his boss called me to tell me he was having what looked like small seizures. I told them skip urgent care and go right to the hospital. Had no idea what had happened at that point, watching him have seizures while the ER staff called poison control. I found the Wellbutrin bottle in his work pants and was able to tell poison control what he had OD'd on. He wound up on a ventilator that night, and we lived in the ICU for 5 days of hell. It's a miracle he made it through. When they took him off the vent, I genuinely thought he had permanent brain damage. It was horrific. He couldn't even feed himself. We were both struggling bad with opiate addiction at the time, and that this first night, there was 3 other ODs and none of them made it. The other rooms in the ICU were empty in the morning. I was insanely terrified he wouldn't make it. We're both clean now. It'll be 4 years this Thanksgiving, but it's definitely left its mark. He's had 2 more mild seizures since then, but none whatsoever since we got clean. Serotonin syndrome is so dangerous. The whole thing traumatized me. I refused to keep taking Wellbutrin because I was so scared it would happen again. It took me 2 years of trying other meds unsuccessfully, and us both getting clean to feel comfortable enough to go on it again. Stay safe out there, comrades. My son was born C-section. For those that don't know, C-section babies don't start breathing by themselves because they don't have the squeeze, which also helps get amniotic fluid out of their lungs. They pulled him out, and he was just limp for what felt like hours. I watched them massage his chest while he didn't move at all. This is all very standard, and none of the doctors and nurses seemed panicked, so deep down I knew it was okay, but on the day I gained a child, I thought I'd lost one. It was absolutely terrifying. Nothing massive, but proper heebie-jeebies to the core. I was walking home late at night down an unlit bike path when off to the side ahead I saw a pair of eyes watching me out of the darkness. Not lit up or reflecting any light like in a film, just a dark pair of eyes. My brain had put into super focus watching me walk. Every single hair stood up on edge. It felt like I was no longer actively in control of my body. The manliest tone I've ever erupted out of me is a dull roar. I can't do it justice, but picture Arthur Morgan off of Red Dead Redemption 2 saying, "Whoa, boy," for a close enough feeling of this full-bodied noise I just conjured. The eyes vanished and a badger effing legged it. All control shot back and I laughed my arse off for a few seconds before continuing home. I'm an Army Infantry Iraq War veteran. The only two people that actually respected me and treated me nicely were in my squad. I saw them both not live. I was doing my job. I was covering my zone. I've seen human corpses blown to bits in pink mush. I've seen and heard and smelled death, but the heaviest deaths of all were that of Jason and Brandon, and I couldn't even go to their funerals, and I have to live with that every single goddamn day for the rest of my life. One night I went outside. Our apartment is very hot in the late spring, early summer, and I had a habit of going out at night to cool off. I went to a bench and there was a very young hare under it, and it ran away. About a minute later, its mother, I presume, came running at me, full tilt and screaming. I never heard a rabbit scream before. Also, the hares here are huge. I hope she found her baby, but that hare charging at me, screaming, haunts my nightmares. Rotten.com. I didn't want the link to be posted, nor do I know if it's still a site you can view, but kids shouldn't have access to an unsupervised computer with internet connection. Seen crime scene pictures of deceased people from years ago. Nothing seemed new, but yep, still think about the things I saw years later. My uncle got pulled down by his dog when he was drunk and busted his head on the corner of their brick house. I was around 10 at the time, and my parents and I were picking him and my aunt up to go to dinner. He fell onto the ground and clutched his head. Over the next few minutes, the ground stained red around him. We didn't call an ambulance, because money, and drove him to the hospital holding multiple towels to his head. At the hospital waiting room, they wanted to see the injury, and he took the towel away, and blood started spurting across the room. He had a deep gash, and his skull was visible. The woman who asked to see it was quickly like, "Put it back, put it back." His head was basically like Pac-Man. He somehow survived without brain damage, I think. He's always been a little slow due to alcohol and didn't change after. Never passed out from blood loss or anything either. Also, when I was young, my mom and I smelled something dead for 2 weeks when I was getting off of the bus, but thought it was an animal. We lived next to a bridge and someone had died sleeping under it and was found by people walking on the train tracks. A bunch of police and FBI, maybe, and other agencies were suddenly around one day, and we got questioned. We were light suspects, I believe, until it was confirmed he died from old age and exposure after wandering out of a nursing home. Depending where, cuts and bruises and punctures to the face can really bleed a lot, so glad your uncle was okay. Also glad you didn't murder an old person under a bridge. Not what I've seen, but what I've been through. I was 6 at the time, and we were on a floating trip. I was scared to go on this water slide, but my cousins convinced me to do it. So we go down, and we're coming up at a wall. Suddenly, before I know what's going on, my tube flips upside down, and I fall into the water. I start to panic and scream, mainly because I didn't know what to do. A guy pulled me up, and I haven't been on a float trip like that since due to the trauma. Not only that experience, but because later that day, we heard news that a woman drowned in the same area an hour later. It could have been me, but thankfully, it wasn't. There was a van with a family in it, grandmother, father, teenage girl, and an infant that went too fast taking a curve right beside a swamp. I did not witness the crash itself, but I had to be coming around right after it happened. No one was wearing seatbelts, including the infant. The van struck multiple trees before landing in the water. The grandmother was halfway out of the passenger side. She was cut up, eyes open, mouth agape, and her neck was very broken. The teenage girl ended up on the other side of the swamp. Her head was scalped. The flesh from the brow up was lodged in the cracked back window. It was like somebody hung up a bloody, fleshy wig. The rest of her body was twisted and half nude on the opposite bank. There was no sight of the baby. I never even knew there was one until after the fact. The father was in the driver's side, half in the water. What haunts me the most is he was still alive and screaming. The screams were something else. It was desperate, painful, and inhumane. I can still hear it when I think about it. I remember his screams progressively waning and growing quiet, and the absolute helplessness I felt about it. Ambulance did not get there in time. I was 4 years old, and I had woken up in the morning and gotten upset by my alarm. Then I go to wake up my mom because I gotta go to the bus stop, and I crawl out of my crib, walk down the hall into her and my dad's room. My dad is gone at work, and there she is, laying, not breathing, eyes bloodshot red, and a bowl of rice. It was cocaine, but I thought it was rice because I was 4. And at the time, I watched a lot of action movies, and they would be at the hospital, and the doctor says to me, "They aren't breathing. They're gone forever." And I was not an idiot and realized not breathing equaled dead. And I go to my sister's room down the hall, which now haunts me every time I walk down it, and I tell her, "Mom isn't breathing." She screams half asleep, "What?" And she bolts up and walks to my mom's room. Next thing I know, she's pushing around all the furniture, and she yelled at me to go outside, and there's a loud sound in the driveway. My dad came home because he forgot his medicine, a whole other story why he needs it. And then my sister, her nickname is Zizi, so I'm gonna call her that from now. Zizi hands me her laptop, and I watch YouTube for about 3 hours. Then I walk in the house again. My dad is sitting against the wall in the hall crying next to Zizi, and she tells me they will be outside in a minute. And then next thing I know, in my room playing games, and a week later at her funeral. Every time I walk down that hall, it brings me back to that memory, and my eyes water up a bit. I'm 14 now. Went fishing with my dad and his friends when I was 12. We found a woman on the beach who had been washed ashore after being swept off a pier a number of days before. This was back before mobile phones, so I had to stay with the body while they went off to find somewhere to call it in. They went in opposite directions. Someone who has been in the sea for that length of time is not a nice thing to see. I've actually seen a fair few bodies and things since, and that's definitely the worst of them. Trigger warning, gross stuff ahead. Patient fresh after extensive surgery for fournier gangrene, necrosis of tissue in the genital area. Don't Google it if you can't handle some disgusting stuff. Where his pubic mound used to be was essentially a large hole with his completely skinned penis poking out of. Ugh. His first question was how long it would take till he could F again. He wasn't a very smart guy. Ugh. 2006, I think it was, saw a guy get shot at a bus stop. Bus pulled up a minute or two later. People were stepping over the body to get on or off the bus. Oof. Halloween 2008, my kid's grandma's boyfriend shot himself in the head in the basement, and that was only the first time I saw a man without a head. In 2012, driving across country, saw a huge pileup on the interstate. One of the drivers near the front wasn't wearing a seatbelt, came through the windshield and sandpapered most of his face and chest off. In 2015, I saw another guy without a head, most of it anyway, while on the beach on the East Coast. As far as I know, he killed himself and wasn't found until about 10 minutes before we came across it. And most recently, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, had a neighbor that killed his wife, stabbed her a bunch of times, and could see blood smears all over her window and the front porch. So, getting to know your narrator a little bit better. Years ago in America, there was a story of a person being trampled to death on Black Friday in a Walmart. And my own personal protest, to this day, I've never been in a Walmart. My daughter got ill earlier this year. She was sick a few times and was shivering so hard I've never known anything like it. But also her temperature was pretty high, reading in the high 38 degrees. Anyway, she slept in bed with us and was shivering all night long. The next morning, my mom came round and my daughter perked right up and then went down for a nap. I expected her to be fine when she woke, as she had been her usual self in the morning. But when I woke her, she was just not right, floppy, and I was having a really hard time keeping her awake and getting her to respond to me at all. I took her slipper off, and her foot was blue. It was horrible, so horrible. When we took her to the hospital, Her temperature was actually much higher, and the chart they used to measure vitals was scoring 11. Anything over 5 is considered high risk of sepsis, so I was terrified. They were convinced it was sepsis or meningitis. Thankfully, it was a lesser infection, which responded really well to a heavy-duty dose of antibiotics, and after a couple of days monitoring in the hospital, she was right as rain. But seeing her unresponsive with blue feet was just the most awful thing as a parent. I really thought we might lose her. I was in a terrible home at 11 years old. My mother was a hoarder and never cleaned our house. It had black mold and rotten food and dishes everywhere. We had a dog that shit in each room, and our dog had matted fur. I only had one pair of clothes that never got washed. My mother had lots of money but refused to spend it on my siblings and I. CPS was in and out of our house countless times. Took them at least 20 visits until our dad got custody when I was 14. They put it off so long since she's my birth mother. She also has epilepsy, and one time I saw her having a seizure. She bit her tongue so hard and started coughing up blood. I thought she was dying, so I called 911 when I was 8. She got so mad, yelled at me, threatened to hit me, saying it was my fault and how much she hated me. Never see her nowadays.